Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Malice in the Mitten. I am your host, Tracy Preston, along with my bestie, Christine Mulligan. Hey, Christine.
Hey, Trace. Hey, everybody. All right, what are we getting into this time? Are we talking about, because I know last time we talked about the whole copper mine thing, and then you said you had another story about that. So are we doing that one or something different?
Yeah, we are doing that one, and this is going to be our follow-up to all the copper mining that was going on up there in the UP. So, I'm going to tell you of a horrible story of a disaster that happened in the copper mining town called Red Jacket, and that is in the Upper Peninsula. And as I mentioned when we finished the episode for the Copper Rush and Angelique Mott. So, let's get into it. This is Season 4, Episode 9, The Italian Hall Disaster. Calumet is the name of the region in the Upper Peninsula, but the town where the Italian Hall was is called Red Jacket. When I did the story of Angelique Mott, that time frame was 1845, and the Copper Rush was just kicking into full swing. Now, today's story takes us to 1913, and it has a lot to do, well, everything to do with mining that was going on at the time, such as the unsafe working conditions, long hours, and the risk of losing your life just by going to work deep in the copper mine. All that was required to work in the mines was a strong and able body, and of course, you had to be a man. You didn't even have to speak English, for crying out loud. And this is why there was such an influx of immigrants into the Upper Peninsula. If you're a man and able to work, you were hired, period. You didn't even have to possess a particular skill set. Working in the mines was incredibly dangerous. So dangerous, in fact, that at least one man per week would die, and dozens more would come home injured. Now here's some food for thought. Men that were working in the mines were from all over the place. As I mentioned previously, the men in the mines were from Italy, Croatia, Finland, Slovenia, Hungary, Poland, the British Isles, Canada, and Austria. But the most populous of immigrants in this area were the Finns. So working in the mines are men from all different locations in the world, and none of them spoke English. With a mix of different languages in a mine, they really couldn't talk to one another. They couldn't complain to one another, and certainly couldn't commiserate about their working conditions. Pretty smart of the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company, which is also referred to as C&H, if you think about it. Now, let's talk about the different types of work in the mines. There were the miners, and there were the trammers. The trammers were paid the least, and their work was incredibly backbreaking. They were also paid the least. They were to fill the carts chock full of rock and then manually push the carts up until they reached the shaft hoist. Now, let's think of the sheer weight of all that for a minute. When I look at pictures of trammers pushing a cart of rocks, to me, the cart looks like it's about 3 to 4 feet wide and maybe 6 to 7 feet long and 4 feet deep. Now imagine that full of rock. And now they are manually pushing that uphill to a track or on a track. Insane. And I can't even imagine how much weight that was. And to do this for 10 to 12 hours a day, oh, that's insane. Sorry, I just need to pause on that because it's mind-blowing to me. I mean,
it's on wheels, though. So it's just like when your car, well, back in the day when we all used to drive oopties and your car would stall, you would have to push it. It's a couple of 1,000 pounds that you're pushing. But since it's on wheels, it's not as difficult as you would imagine.
Right. I mean, it's on a track, but still, I mean,
the uphill portions would definitely be bad.
Yeah. I mean, Todd and I were, for Halloween, we were making this big old lodge and stuff, and it was super windy, and we had some pretty decent-sized rocks in our yard. And so we were picking those up, and those little suckers are heavy. I could not imagine a big old cart full of rock. I mean, it's heavy. Wheels are not, and you're going uphill. It's just nuts.
Yeah, I get it, but the wheels definitely help. So I'm just saying, the wheels made it humanly possible. Without the wheels, they wouldn't have gone nowhere.
Yeah, forget about it. All right, so What did the trammer earn for a full day's labor, you may wonder? Well, I'll tell you. They would make $2 to $3 a day. Can you imagine that? Now, it wasn't even a promised amount that they would get paid on the daily. Oh no. Their tram bosses would look at the carts full of rock and estimate their wages based on how much rock the trammers would move. Now, mind you, there were no scales to weigh the amount of rock each trammer moved. The bosses would just eyeball that shit and give an estimate. Real nice, huh?
And I'm sure that was always a low ball estimate.
Exactly. That's 50 cents. Next. All right, now let's talk about the miners and what their role was. Now, the miners were the ones that operated the drills, which cut holes into the rock walls. They would use explosives to blast the ore loose. Now, ore is a natural rock or sediment that contains one or more valuable minerals that are concentrated, such as copper, which can be mined, treated, and sold. Working as a miner was a very dangerous job, as you can imagine, but it paid better than being a trammer. When mining first began, they would work by candlelight. Then finally, the birth of electric lamps made their way into the mines. But even with electric lighting, I'm sure it was still incredibly dimly lit down there. And I don't think I would like that at all.
I'm sure those miners, they started to hone their eyeballs like bats. Most of them probably saw in the dark. They got to it.
They honed their eyeballs like bats.
No, seriously. People don't realize that we do have that, we being humans, have that capacity to adjust and kind of, what's the word I'm searching for? What is it called? Evolution? I can't think today, not enough coffee. But we can evolve our senses to meet our needs for where we're at and what we're doing.
Yeah.
Just like when you're in the dark, it takes you a minute for your eyes to adjust. When you first turn the lights off in a room, you can't really see much. But if you fall asleep and then you wake up, even if it's still dark in your room, you can kind of see everything in your room because your eyes have adjusted.
Yeah.
So those miners, I bet you they actually were the opposite. They didn't like bright lights, I bet.
Yeah, I can see that, right? Because they're spending the majority of their day down there.
It's even worse because they used to work 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
But it's just we feel like most of our lives are spent at work. So it's actually your personal time that, you do anything else with. These miners, when they worked as miners, they worked all day. They basically got off to sleep, shower, and rinse and repeat.
Yeah, throw some
That's
food down. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the miners and the trammers were down in that shaft for 10 to 12 hours a day. Now, they would be lowered into the mines before the sun rose, and they would leave the mines after the sun set. So can you imagine what that would do to a person's psyche? Seeing only darkness and spending most of your day deep down in a mine?
Yeah, no doubt. Most of them were mental, for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. It would make you crazy. So what would they do when they had to, relieve themselves? There were not any designated places for a bio break, and going up and out of the mine to go to the bathroom was not really an option. So the men would just relieve themselves right there where they were working. Oh my God. Can you imagine? Now, incredibly, the men didn't complain about these conditions because their minds were too occupied with not getting hurt, or even worse, dying in the mine. Now, according to Stephen Lehto's book, Death's Door, in 1912, 47 men were killed in the copper mines, while 643 were seriously injured, and another 3,936 men were slightly injured. The men had to be careful of falling rocks, explosions, fire, and of course, falling and plummeting to their death down a shaft. And these shafts were thousands of feet deep into the earth. So let me explain to you how a mine is created. Quote, men would locate a vein of copper, and they would dig and dig to expose and remove the copper. Now, they would dig to create a hole to widen it into a shaft. And now, shafts are vertical or near vertical tunnels going down into the earth. If the shaft created continued to expose the vein of copper, then large timbers would be set in place to stabilize it, and a shaft house would be built at the opening. So when I'm looking at a picture of the trammers online, pushing their carts of crushed rock and whatnot, there are giant trees down there that they put into place to stabilize the shafts. And this whole process just blows my mind. Like, it's totally crazy. Like, it looks like, of course, these guys are way underground. They're in these huge tunnels and caves that they're making. And then beside them and behind them and everywhere just look like giant trees. So they just basically chop off the roots, chop off the tops, and cram those down there and shove them up there to stabilize it. It's just bonkers to me.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. Like, if you back up from that and you think about it, what humans have done to manipulate our surroundings in so many ways, shapes, and forms. That mining and going down there and creating what we thought was stable, like using big trees and stuff. But in actuality, when the earth wanted to, it would just crumble that tree, which is why mine, would crush all the men so often. You hear all those stories about how the mine collapsed.
Yeah.
It was just semi-educated guessing, and that's how everybody lived. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You're blasting out all this rock, and then you're going to take a tree and stabilize it. Rock's a lot stronger than a tree, but...
And gravity and all that. So the deeper you dig, the heavier the earth above the mine is.
Mm-hmm.
It is going to hold all that. You think several trees are going to hold all that? I think the mining and the whole concept of mining, like, if you really think about it, it's kind of mind-blowing that humans even thought to do that.
I know. And the bravery, because I'm going to tell you right now, if I was down there in a hole, no way. I would lose my ever-living mind down there. Nope, nope, and nope. Too scary.
Yeah. Because it's not only claustrophobic, but you literally know that at any moment the earth can give way and crush you.
Like, today could be the day I don't come home, guys. Love ya. See you in a bit, hopefully. It's nuts.
It is crazy, but that is apparently, so we're told, that is how most of them felt the last day every day.
Mm-hmm.
And they still went and did it.
Yeah.
Which kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because how destitute and helpless did they feel?
Yeah, and these people are coming from all over the world. So they're immigrating into the Upper Peninsula, bringing their wives, their children.
Yeah. Bananas.
Yeah, it really is. So let's talk about a shaft house. So it's either called a shaft house or a shaft hoisting house. That's what they build at the top, right? Once they're like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good place for us to mine. So the shaft hoisting house is simply a structure that houses machinery and equipment at the top of the mine shaft, and it is equipped with large engines used for raising and lowering cars. Now, the mine was a deep mine, so at the beginning of the workday, men would be lowered into the mine in these cars from the shaft house, and then at the end of the day, the men would load up in the cars to be hoisted back up to the surface. Now, to me, when I look at pictures of these men going down into the mine in these cars, kind of reminded me of like a roller coaster. Like, legit, they're all piled in these cars and they're ready to go down. I'm like, oh, man. For me, I say...
Maybe that is where we got roller coasters. Maybe they were having some fun with it, and they're actually the original inventors of roller coasters, miners.
Yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to go with that because it all makes sense, right? I mean, this is in the 1840s, early 19... And, like, from the 18... Right? Because copper mining started, like, in the 1840s. So, yeah, think about it. Perhaps that's where the roller coaster was born.
Yeah, that was the one bit of fun that they used to have, was riding it back down the shaft. And they were like, hey, everybody should enjoy this.
Woo! Going down to work is fun. And then that's the end of the fun. All right, so let's talk about who owned and ran the mines up here in the UP. The big one was Calumet and Hecla, Amique and Alouez, Quincy, and the Isle Royale, along with a handful of others, but it is Calumet and Hecla that was the largest, and in Red Jacket. Now let's dig into who C&H was and how they came to be. It was in 1864 when Edwin J. Hulbert discovered a large amount of copper in Houghton County. So he started the Hubert Mining Company here in the UP. Then in 1865, he created the Calumet Company, then the Hecla Company. Hubert, of course, was a major shareholder in both. But the thing about Hubert is that he didn't have knowledge or experience on how to dig, crush, or concentrate the ore. So other shareholders in the company sent in Alexander Agassiz. He was the son of a famous geologist named Louis Agassiz to run the mine. Now that the mine was being run with great expertise, the two companies merged in 1871, forming the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company, also referred to as C&H. Calumet and Hecla became giants in copper mining from 1868 to 1886. They were the leading producer of copper in the United States, and not only that, but from 1869 to 1876, they were the leading producer of copper in the world. Also, from 1870 to 1901, Calumet and Hecla made the majority of copper produced in Michigan's Copper District. By 1897, the Calumet and Hecla's Red Jacket shaft reached a vertical depth of 4,900 feet. Yeah, you heard that right. And at the time, this was the deepest mine in the world. There was a neighboring mine called the Tamarack, and this was also bought by C&H when it was renamed the Tamarack, Calumet, and Hecla Mine, and this then became the world's deepest mine at 5,500 feet. And it remained the deepest mine until approximately 1915, only to be beaten in depth by the Morro Velho gold mine in Brazil, and that baby was 5,824 feet deep. And to all of those, I say, hell no. There's no way that I'm diving into the earth that deep. Again, nope, nope, and no.
This is where we get all those stories about Middle Earth.
Exactly. I'd be afraid of what we'd find down there. All right, so C&H not only owned the mines, but they also owned the land as well. C&H would allow stores and homes to be built on their land, but they also built many homes for the miners to live in. Sounds great, right? As a worker in the mines, you could live in a home by C&H as long as you worked for them and at a discounted rate. So as you can imagine, many jumped at this opportunity. But just one slight mishap, and you could be evicted if C&H felt like it. According to the book Death's Door, by 1912, C&H owned 1,764 homes on their land. And if you were working for C&H, rent was as low as $4 to $5 a month. And for workers, that was approximately 2 days' worth of pay. Now, for anyone who chose to build their own home on C&H property, they would have to sign something called a ground rent lease. Now, C&H could cancel any lease with a 90-day notice if the tenant failed to fulfill the terms of the lease. If that lease was canceled, the homeowner had 90 days to basically remove their home from C&H property. And if they could not move the home, well, it simply became the property of C&H. Another caveat to the ground rent lease was if at any time the miners stopped working for the mine owners could evict the miner and their family. Now, it's important to remember that the miners working were not English speaking. They were from many different countries, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Now, I'm in the medical profession and I speak pretty decent English, but what I'm about to read to you is from the book Death's Door by Steve Lehto, and this is a snippet of what a ground lease contract said. Quote, provided that in any case any rent shall be due or unpaid, or the party of the second part shall erect or maintain, or suffer to be erected or maintained thereon any other structure of structures than aforesaid, or shall neglect or refuse to pay any tax or assessment, ordinary or extraordinary, levied upon said land or upon the structure or structures to be erected thereon during the life of this lease, for the space of 60 days after the same shall become due and payable, or shall sell or suffer to be sold upon said land any spirituous or intoxicating liquors, or shall carry on. What? I can barely even understand this.
Ugh. So basically, this is the beginning of corporate greed and fucking over the little man. This makes me sick. And I get you. I get what you're saying. Like, you could barely understand what that says. But basically, that says, like, do what you will, do what you want. We're always going to own it. And if you falter in any way, shape, or form, we're going to take it from you, no matter what you put into it.
Yeah. And
Gross.
yeah, and it's like you better act the way you're supposed to act. No fighting, no drinking, or you're fired. They get one day off a week.
This is the capitalist enslavement. That's what it is. Capitalist enslavement. This is the beginnings of it.
It sure is.
Gross.
It's like out smoking mirrors. Oh, look, we have all this for you. But don't fuck up or you're out. Deuces. And if you can't break down that home you just built, it's ours. Bye. And if for any reason a miner quit working for the mine and they lived on one of CNH's homes, you had 15 days to get out. It's not long.
Yeah, that's disturbing. But, yeah.
Yep. It's nuts.
So there's basically enslavement, but they gave them peanuts back.
Exactly.
Right.
All right, so in order to keep their miners working, CNH built communities around the mine. They made everything available to the workers, so they kept the workers working a mile below the surface. For example, they built the first industrial hospital in the United States in 1868, and they also brought in nurses and physicians and employed them. And in 1877, CNH started an employee aid fund for the ill and injured. If you chose to participate to receive these funds, you could voluntarily do so, and your contribution would be 50 cents per week, of which CNH would then price match. Now, CNH was the first American company to do this, so that's quite forward thinking. So that's pretty cool. Little price matching.
Well, that's okay. They're giving them a little bit back for quality of life. And technically, that is how we live today, is you have to work to live, and you hope to live from work. So it's the beginnings of how we literally live in society.
Mm-hmm.
Conditions for workers were slightly improved, but it's still kind of enslavement. But whatever.
Yeah, it is. All right, so CNH also built clubhouses with a bowling alley, employee libraries that housed materials in 20 different languages. They built schools and churches, supplied consumer goods such as coal, firewood, and electricity for those who rented homes or for those who had ground lease with CNH at wholesale prices. Sounds great, right? Well, it was so good that it caught the attention of a writer for Harper's Magazine in 1882. And when that writer visited the mine in Red Jacket, the magazine gave praise to CNH, quote, "But the Calumet Company have no reason to fear strikes among any portion of their workforce," end quote. In 1898, the Michigan Commissioner of Mineral Statistics said, quote, "No mining company in the world treats its employees better than Calumet and Hecla."
Okay, because they were giving them quality of life by building communities and giving them health workers to keep them healthier. So they were enriching their workforce slightly, so that was praised. That's come a long way since then. We still have room to improve, but we've come a long way. Okay, kudos to them. They were the first to give their workers quality of life.
Yeah, and now mind you, this company is making money hand over fist, right? They're the leading copper producer in Michigan and the world at this point, so they got plenty of money. So it was pretty smart tactic for them to do that. And God only knows.
Yeah, because if they share the wealth, they'll have a better workforce and all of that. But mining in general is still very dangerous work. So those miners, even though they had a good life, I mean, it doesn't sound like it, but they had homes and they were making well above their bills and salary. So their families were probably living okay and all of that. However, they were still not getting paid enough for the danger that they were putting themselves in. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they were shortening their lives considerably. by breathing in all that ore.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I did read is that, down in the copper mines is not as dangerous for you, meaning what you're inhaling versus if you're mining coal, right? Coal is very dangerous because then you got all that powdery shit and you're breathing that in. So that was one thing that the copper miners didn't have to, well, at least that was one thing they didn't have to deal with, right?
Yeah, but I also think that that's kind of skewed because if you think about the medical knowledge that we had back then, yeah, obviously, it's easy to see that these coal miners weren't breathing that easy. But the thing is with the copper mining, and I wonder if you came across any of this, when they're breathing in those heavy metals, they're breathing it in because there's dust. So the human body is taking in those heavy metals that they're, the fine particles that are all over the place. So it's not going to be a lung issue. It's going to be a mental issue. And we're just getting to the crust of mental issues now. Mm-hmm. So back when one of these guys went mad, they probably just thought he was going mad. And they probably put him down. But they were probably going mad because they had high toxic levels of mineral ore in their systems.
Yeah.
But we would have never known that because we didn't know about all that back then.
Exactly. And no, I didn't come across anything like that. But wouldn't that have been interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you probably wouldn't be able to because if we'd never thought about it, we probably never looked for it. But I'm sure all of those miners, when and if they passed, if we could go back in time and do an autopsy on them, I'm sure they would have crazy levels of metals in their body.
Yeah, and we're going to call it copper brain.
Yeah, copper brain. Okay, we did another thing. We diagnosed a whole new diagnosis that we don't even know it ever existed, but we're just going to imagine it did.
Exactly, because it's a possibility.
Copper brain, you're a Looney Tune.
Oh my goodness, we're going to have to put a bunch of signs and symptoms that go along with copper brain. I'm ready.
Copper brain. I love it.
All right, so, okay, here we go. All right, so many said that the mines were rife with paternalism. Now, quote, paternalism is a system which placed the mining company in a parent-child type of a relationship with mine workers, their families, and the community. And because of all the amenities provided, such as the libraries, the bathhouses, and houses at reasonable rental rates to attract and retain skilled workers, these benefits were intended to reward good work, instill loyalty to the company, and quell any complaints about the working conditions and compensation. Paternalism in the copper country created a definite pecking order in both the workplace and in the community. Skilled workers with mining experience from Cornwall, Germany, and other mining areas in the United States received better jobs and homes on company property close to work, while unskilled workers from places such as Finland, Italy, and Eastern Europe often had to live in more expensive and often congested housing off company property. While company-provided amenities might seem like a benefit to its workers, if you strayed away from the company's good graces, you could lose it all right quick.
A case of being in the club, which is where we probably get the good old boys club from.
Yeah.
It probably all the way back when is the ones who had, and the ones who didn't kept not having.
Yeah. It's the way of the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the mining companies found the most loyal workers were those who had families. And so they had homes to themselves. But if you were a single man, then you were encouraged to find families that would take you in to live with them. So they didn't really want to deal with that one dude. They want the committed family man because he's got a bunch of mouths to feed, And
he has something to keep him inspired.
Yeah.
Keep working, being enslaved. Absolutely. That was the demented viewpoint, is if you had something to worry about, then you would be a harder worker.
Yeah, exactly. So not only are the hours long, the men, for the most part, especially in the winter, never even saw daylight. And their wages were not consistent as they were based on someone just, eyeballing your work and never truly weighing the cart full of ore and rock because that's, right, how they based your pay. So, no, they didn't weigh that shit. The men who worked in the mines, as I mentioned, worked 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The work was dangerous enough as it was, but now CNH bought a new piece of equipment that made the dangers of mining all the worse. The Leonard Ingersoll one-man drill. Now, previously, blasting holes required a 3-man team, or as they say, family. One man would be in control of the steel drill, while the other 2 men would take turns hitting the steel with sledgehammers. Also, before the one-man drill was a 2-man drill, and now this system was a mechanical drill that operated with compressed air. It was more efficient than the 3-man system, but it still required 2 men to set it up and operate it. But it was in 1913 when mines replaced the 2-man drill with the 1-man drill. This only required 1 man to operate and move it. Here were the miners' biggest concerns with this. The drill broke up the mining teams, which left miners unemployed and bringing in less money to their families. And as the name states, the 1-man drill meant that 1 man was there working alone. Now, many accidents can and did happen, and that miner may not be discovered for hours if they needed help, or when the miner was found, it was just simply too late. The 1-man drill was dubbed the Widowmaker.
Yeah, well, that's still the same case. As we develop technology, we need less and less humans to run that technology. But in the case of mining and the safety practice, like leaving 1 guy down a shaft by themselves, drilling up rock and hoping those trees hold, that was crazy. And let alone all the toxic fumes that they were breathing in with that 1-man drill, because wasn't it like gas powered and whatnot?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think about scuba diving. I used to scuba dive, and you can never be alone when you're scuba diving.
Yeah, for safety reasons, because anything can go wrong at any time, and you have nobody there seeing the signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was dangerous.
Yeah, highly, highly dangerous. Now, this is where the Western Federation of Miners, also called WFM, comes into the picture, as the mines were not unionized. And this is also when Anna, quote, Big Annie Klobuchar Clement, enters our story. Annie was born in Calumet in 1888 to George and Mary Klobuchar. She was the oldest of 5 siblings. Now, why did they call her Big Annie, you may be wondering? Well, she stood at 6 feet 2 inches tall. And it was in February of 1913 that Annie spearheaded the formation of the Women's Auxiliary No. 15 of the Western Federation of Miners in Calumet. It was the impetus of the 1-man drill, coupled with unstable wages and long hours, that encouraged miners to join the union. Now, I just want to stop for a second. Klobuchar, all I can think about is, what was her name, Klobuchar? She ran for president 4 years ago. And it just makes me wonder if they're related somehow. It's not
way back in the day, apparently, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that's not a
family names for something.
Exactly. That is not a common name. All right. So the miners were instructed to speak to the mine's management regarding their hours, the 1-man drill, and wages before moving forward with union support. So they did. And that got them nowhere. And I'm sure that's not a surprise to anybody listening. So on June 29th, 1913, an official ballot took place, and that ballot contained just 2 questions for the miners to vote on. Quote, 1, shall the miners' unions, acting through the district union, ask for a conference with the employers to adjust wages, hours, and working conditions in the Copper District of Michigan? A simple answer of either yes or no. The second question, shall the Executive Board of the Copper District Union, acting in conjunction with the Executive Board of the Western Federation of Miners, declare a strike if the mine operators refuse to grant conference or concessions? Again, a simple answer of yes or no. Well, when the ballots were counted, it was clear. The majority of the ballots came back with a yes to both questions. Its new members, the miners, were ready to move forward with the WFM to negotiate for them. Now, not all miners wanted to join the union and allow the WFM to negotiate on their behalf, because They knew that they would be fired from CNH. It is estimated that approximately 1,000 miners left Calumet after the vote. Basically, they left before they could be fired. So, the WFM sent a letter to the mines which contained their demands. Now, I'm going to read to you the letter that was sent to CNH from WFM, and which I've taken from the book Death's Door, and the date on the letter was July 14th, 1913. Quote, to the Calumet and Hecla, Tamarack, Amique, Eloise, Sentinel, Superior, Laurium, Isle Royale, and other mining companies connected with and under the management of Calumet and Hecla, and it's addressed to James McNaughton, who's the manager. Gentlemen, your employees, organized into various unions of the Western Federation of Miners, have decided by referendum to vote, to ask that you meet the representative and conference on some day during this month for the purpose of discussing the possibilities of shortening the working day, raising wages, and making some changes in the working conditions. The men working in your mines are dissatisfied with the wages, hours, and other conditions of employment. Realizing that as individuals they would not have sufficient strength to correct these evils or to lessen the burden placed upon them, they have organized into local unions of the Western Federation of Miners, and through the local unions they have formed one compact body of the whole copper district, with an understanding and hope that from now on they may be enabled to sell their labor collectively with greater advantages for themselves as well as their employers. While the men have decided that they must have greater remuneration for their services and that the working day must be shortened, it is not their or our desire that we should have a strike, with all the sufferings that is bound to bring them, to their employers and to the general public. On the other hand, we earnestly hope that the questions that have arisen between us would be settled amicably, with fairness and justice to both sides. Should you have the same feeling, we believe that the friendly relations that have existed between you and your employees in the past will continue in the future. However, should you follow the example given by some of the most stupid and unfair mine owners in the past, the men have instructed us by the same referendum vote to call a strike in all the mines owned and controlled by your company. We hope you realize that labor has just as much right to organize as capital, and that at this age, these two forces, labor and capital, while their interests are not identical, must get together and solve the problems that confront them. If you agree to meet us, our representatives will be ready for a conference on any day and at any place you may choose. Your failure to answer this will be taken as proof that you are not willing to meet us and to have the matter settled peacefully. This letter was then forwarded to Quincy Shaw, who was the direct supervisor of the mine in Boston. He said, quote, my present feeling is that I shall not acknowledge the letter in any way whatever, for by writing a letter to the secretary acknowledging the receipt of this one, I would be in measure recognizing the union, end quote. What do you think about them kind of calling them stupid?
I think that was probably a term that was more readily used back then and probably more sophisticated than it sounds to us.
I hope so, because I'm like, wow.
I mean, they basically were being like, that would be dumb on your part to ignore us. But they did decide to ignore them anyway, so you're saying. So what happened?
Right. So as it was, the mines would not even recognize having received the letter from WFM. And on July 23rd, 1913, the strike began, and all Copper County mines in the UP were feeling it. Parades were led down the streets in support of the strike, and right up front was Big Annie carrying a very large American flag. Along with the WFM, both state and national governments tried to work with the mine owners to settle the strike, but to no avail. CNH and other mine managers were not going to negotiate, period. They were still able to get miners to come to work, but only if they ripped their union membership cards in half. They would also employ miners from out of state and, of course, from out of country. By August of 1913, money was thin in the WFM, and the families of the miners that were on strike were suffering. Without any money coming in from WFM to support and feed their families, tensions were growing to say the least. The miners were deputizing trammers. They were also putting spies into the mines to see if they could hear of any union talk. Funny enough, one of the spies that they sent down into the mines, to pretend to be a miner, saw how dangerous the job was, especially with a one-man drill, and asked to be moved to a safer environment. So how about that? One of their own spies is saying, yo, this is super dangerous down here. I don't want to be in this spot.
Yeah, well, I guess that seems like that was the tipping point where they started to give in. Is that what you're going to tell us next?
No, they didn't give in. There was also something called the Seaborville Affair, and this happened on August 14th, 1913, just shy of a month since the strike began. Two men that were striking were named John Kalan and John Stymack. They were walking across mine property when they were told they could not cross by a deputized trammer boss by the name of Humphrey Quick. The two men ignored the warning and continued walking home. Well, that didn't settle well with Quick, so he and another deputy, along with men from a detective agency, were sent to the home of John Kalan. Once there, they tried to get Kalan to come with them to see the supervisor of the mine to talk about what had happened. When Kalan said, nope, I'm not going anywhere with you guys, and went back in the house, well, the next thing Kalan heard was gunfire as the group of men started shooting at and into the house. Stymack and another man in the boarding house named Stanko Stepik, they were wounded, and two other boarders in the home were killed, and their names were Alas Tijan, who died in the house, and Steve Putrick, who died the next day. The funeral procession for the men was led by none other than Big Annie, and behind her were anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 people. Now, needless to say, the deaths of these two men dramatically increased the tensions related to the strike. The guards from the detective agency, along with the deputy sheriff, were convicted of manslaughter in February of 1914. So that took a minute, but hey, at least they were convicted. It's now December 24th, 1913, and Big Annie, the head of the Women's Auxiliary of the WFM, rented the Italian Hall in Calumet as she organized a Christmas party for strikers and their families. The strike at this point had been going on for 5 months. Now, between WFM and citizens of Calumet, gifts and candy were donated for the children. The hall was decorated with donated supplies, and the stage had a Christmas tree set in the corner. The hall was full of Christmas cheer, which is exactly what everyone needed after a hard 5 months enduring the strike. Now, the Italian Hall was a 2-story brick building that was not only a meeting place for miners and union members on the second floor, but the first floor also housed a couple of businesses, such as a saloon, which was on the left, and on the right was the Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. Now, the entrance to the town hall was on the far left, which was through a big arched doorway that led to the second floor. Now, the flight of stairs that went up to the second floor was incredibly steep. They call it a 14-foot rise. So 14 feet almost, straight up. That's kind of dangerous if you ask me. And I think that's out of code. I don't think you can build a stairway that steep anymore. The party was well attended by strikers and their families. There were hundreds of people in attendance having a great time, laughing, dancing, and celebrating the eve of Christmas. When it was time, the children would walk across the stage to receive their Christmas gifts, a small gift and a piece of candy. It was a celebration of which they all desperately needed. Most of the attendees were Finns. As the celebration of the holiday continued, an unidentified man shouted at the top of his lungs, "Fire! Fire!" Then turned and ran out of the hall. Well, you can just imagine the chaos that ensued. Total panic. People were repeating the word "fire" and running as fast as they could to reach the steep staircase. Some of the first adults that ran down the stairs made it out of the hall, but then, as more and more people and children were rushing to get out, People started to trip and fall, and then more adults and children just kept coming and tripping and falling and getting trampled and suffocated. The bodies just kept piling up on top of one another. Luckily, many did not follow the crowd blindly to the stairwell, as they noticed there was not a fire. There was not any smoke that they could see or smell. They hung back and even told people to wait. Some escaped through the kitchen window that had a ladder that would get them down to the ground, and on the side of the building was also a fire escape, and some used that to get out of the building. When the Calumet Fire Department arrived, they also utilized the fire escape to gain entry to the second floor of the hall. Now, why the fire escape, you wonder? Well, when the doors to the stairwell were opened, there was just no way to get up to look for a fire. The pile of bodies filled the stairwell. Al Harvey, a Calumet resident, said, quote, "The hallway was jammed clean from the top to the bottom. There they were, jammed in there, one on top of the other. I've never seen anything like it." Well, there was no fire. What was left was a mass casualty. 73 people lost their lives that Christmas Eve. 60 of the dead were children, and those children were aged 10 and under. The dead were pulled out of the stairwell one by one and laid out at the village hall, which was now used as a temporary morgue for the dead. According to a YouTube video called Vault, the Italian Hall Disaster Overview, Stephen Lehto, shows a response log made by the Red Jacket Fire Department. Quote, "The log shows that the run to the Italian Hall was made at 4:45 p.m. Fire alarm, December 24th, 1913. Box 45, Italian Hall disaster, no fire. Christmas festival for the children of the WFM. Fire call and stampede following down stairway, all piling on top of one another at foot of the stairs. 73 lives crushed out, mostly children, about 10 grown persons." William Nara, a local photographer, heard what had happened, and he headed down to the hall and photographed the dead children, the hall, and the stairwell. The news of the Italian Hall disaster spread like wildfire across front pages of the newspapers, locally and internationally, on Christmas morning. The local newspaper in Calumet, which was also a Finnish newspaper, called out 83 murdered, and murdered is all in caps and exclamation mark after that, but of course that was written in Finnish. It also called out that it was Citizens Alliance hooligans that caused the disaster. Now, the Citizens Alliance was an organization of business owners and citizens and mine owners who opposed the strike. There were several witnesses who said they saw a Citizens Alliance button on the man's jacket who yelled fire, but this man has never been identified. And to this day, this is still an open murder case. Now, there have been a lot of urban legends floating around about the doors of the hall. One was that the doors were being held shut so people could not get out of the hall. Now, that has never been proven as a fact. The other rumor is that the doors on the hall opened inward. Therefore, when people were trying to push the doors open, that's why they didn't push out, thus causing the huge loss of life. Again, from the YouTube video by Stephen Lehto, who authored the book Death's Door, he proved undeniably that this disaster had nothing to do with the doors not opening the correct way. There are pictures that were taken, again from that local news reporter, that shows the doors are open, and both sets of those doors opened outwardly as they should. So the theory that one set of the doors or that both set of the doors open inwardly was completely debunked. With all of Steve's research, he was responsible for revising the history written on the state's Italian Hall historical marker in Calumet. The doors had nothing to do with it. Complete urban legend. Now, the Italian Hall was razed in 1984, and I didn't know what the hell razed meant, so I had to look that up, and it just means completely demolished. As it was in such a state of disrepair, it would have cost a ton of money to make it right. The townspeople wanted the building to be torn down. Now, I think of this kind of like, the schoolhouse in Bath, right? They didn't want to look at it anymore. They didn't want to be reminded of, everything that had happened there. But However, there was one item from the hall that was preserved, and that is the doorway from which the partygoers tried to escape through. And through its arched doorway behind it is a big black memorial with the victims' names and ages at the time of their death. And this memorial is standing in the spot where the Italian Hall used to be. So now you know the horrible malice that took place in Red Jacket in 1913 at the Italian Hall. Isn't that nuts?
That's interesting. But what I'm kind of struck with, and I was kind of listening to see where you went with that, the whole doorway, the archway of the door being the only thing that's left. Like, what exactly do you think they were thinking the meaning of that would be? I mean, if the doorway, if it was a staircase, like, then I feel like that would just memorialize the people that, died on the staircase, right? Because they got trampled or suffocated. But the fact that they chose the doorway to be the memorial, like, what is that saying? That we as a society should better take care of each other by going through the doorway in a more civilized manner, and then we might have gotten through? Or is it saying, that somebody was possibly blocking the outside if they pushed out? Somebody was blocking the outside just long enough for people to pile up and die, and then make it look like they weren't holding the door. Like, I don't know. I'm stuck on that. I don't even know how to get through that.
Yeah.
But the doorway being the memorial is kind of morbid. I feel like there's some kind of prophetic meaning that I'm missing.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to stamp out the whole holding of the door, because when I watched the YouTube videos from Stephen Lehto, I mean, he was like kind of pissed when he was doing it because like someone was calling him out and this and that, but it was never proven. Like, the first couple of adults who got out, they're the ones who probably ran or said, call the fire department or whatever. So there's nothing that says that anybody ever held that door. And I feel the same way as you. It's kind of gruesome. And then when, because I've looked at it online and stared at it for quite some time, what's kind of creepy about it is you have this big, archway. So it's brick on both sides and stone at the top. And then just past the arch is the memorial of all the people. So to me, I'm like, oh my God, it's still showing you the people that were trampled on behind that door. Because really what had happened, and again, from watching the video, Stephen Lehto, and in his book, which I have, and he also has a second edition, which I think he's added some more stuff into it, but, he has like floor plans in the book. And so like to get to the stairwell is actually a narrow, small corner. So, he's hypothesizing that that's where the tripping would start. So it actually kind of started more toward the top. And then, people just kept coming, right? Because they're in a panic. Run, run, run. It's fire. And they're pushing. And there's, I don't know the dates, but previous to this, there was the Iroquois fire. They actually had doors that did open toward the inside. I want to look that up because I'm not sure if that's in Michigan or Ohio. That might be another story if it's in Michigan. But that killed a lot of people. So I do find it, kind of gruesome the way the memorial's set up, right? Go through the archway. There's all the names of the people instead of all the bodies.
Yeah, it's just a little bit morbid. I don't know.
And it's still in the same place. It's in the exact place where the hall was. It wasn't like they moved it off site or anything. It's like right there.
Like they take down everything else that tells the story except for the roadblock. Essentially, the one thing that killed everybody. It's just kind of morbid. Like, I don't know. I don't know why that leaves me with such a eerie feeling. It's just eerie.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a crazy story. And just like the Angelique Mott story, this came from my neighbor, Becky. So again, thank you, Becky. It was very interesting. I never heard of this before. It's very sad. So I guess we should wrap it up. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming back. As always, we appreciate you so much. Have a great week, and we will see you back on Wednesday for Round Robin. Bye, everyone.
Bye.